Most of us had some kind of vision for our marriage, and then as time went on, there were some external factors, maybe some extended family or adult friendships, or maybe just the pressure of a heavy workload that just shattered that vision. And some of us had, maybe some time ago too, just this crystal clear vision of our financial portfolio. Then we didn't anticipate the economic downturn or the medical emergency that just shattered our savings. And some of us, our spiritual life, you would have described it as on fire. But significant paradigm shifts in society have just shattered some of your core convictions. And we talk about that because the idea of vision leaks. And if you want a really good study, okay, found myself just going down this rabbit hole. Do you know that there is a significant difference between the word leak and leakage? Seep and spill, and then those cluster together to form a rupture. Oh my gosh, I spent about 90 minutes researching these words and just reviewing the different dynamics of each and the nuances of each term. And I got really caught up in the difference between leak and spill. So apparently a spill is just like a one and done. It's kind of like UK basketball players for the past decade. You know, they're just one and done. It's over. It happens. And it spills a quantity, and a large quantity of liquid just spills. And the large quantity is relative. I mean, there's a difference between a cup and a barrel and then a tanker. But when there's a spill, it just happens all at once. And then it's messy in the immediate vicinity because it just moves outward, slowly just separates. So a leak, though, happens over time and it's ongoing. And it's a lot smaller than a spill. And the thing about a leak is this: it's not one and done. It just keeps going. It's continuous. And it doesn't stop until it's fixed. Vision leaks. So I saw this at play and it was fantastic. I'm at a Starbucks. Again, surprise, right? So I'm at this Starbucks and I noticed that there is just a common Joe there. And then there's a guy who's in a Chick-fil-A, and it's not just one of these Chick-fil-A shirts like you see at somebody at the drive-thru. This is like upper management. You know, it's got the fleece and the embroidered logo. This guy has some weight around Chick-fil-A. So they come into this Starbucks, they sit at this table, and apparently it's a job interview. I get really nosy in these situations. So a couple of times go toss some paper away that you don't really need to, maybe go get an extra refill just to go by and just get a glance at some paperwork or hear a keyword or something like that. But apparently there's this job interview going on. And over the course of this interview, and I don't know if it's going really well or not, but there's this job interview going on, and this guy's from Chick-fil-A, but you could tell he's upper management. And then all of a sudden they're gone. They're just out of the picture. And then I noticed that in their absence, there's just this spill on the floor. Well, I did a little more research, kind of this emerging investigator that I am. Did a little more research, and apparently it wasn't just a one and done spill. There was some kind of leak in this guy's cup. And it was just like arching over and going into the floor, and it created this stain on the floor. Well, what was really interesting is that wet floor sign, do you know who put it there? The guy from Chick-fil-A. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so profound. You've got this guy who works in this one particular setting, and he knows the ins and outs of this business. So when he finds himself in another scenario, another context, another setting, and there's a leak that happens, he knows exactly what to do. That was super cool to me because that's exactly what happens here. And that's why what we're doing this morning when we do some teaching and we open up the Bible or the Word of God, that's why it's so important, and that's why we engage it, because when we do, He engages us and He realigns us with His vision. And He helps us understand what His vision looks like because it leaks. And we come here and we're realigned with this vision of God so that when we find ourselves in another context and there's some kind of leakage that's just shattering our relational vision, it's just shattering our financial vision, it's just shattering our spiritual vision, then we know how to put his word and his ways into practice in that other context. So we're walking through Genesis, and what we're doing, Genesis is the beginning of the Bible, and the word actually means beginning. And if you like this kind of stuff, maybe you've heard the word Pentateuch or Torah. Well, those are a reference to the first 5 books of the Bible, and Genesis is the beginning of that. So Genesis is a book about the beginning of creation. But you're not too far into reading into the text that you realize, oh wow, this idea of sin has come in and it has just destroyed and dismantled God's initial vision for creation. And it sent a ripple of just destruction and dysfunction throughout human history. So you keep reading Genesis, and then you see there's characters with the names of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And God is actually getting in touch and getting in the heart and mind of these characters, these guys right here, we call them patriarchs, so that he can move them into this unknown future where things are a little uncertain. Or it's one of those moments where you're unsure. You've got a nudge, a prompting, a feeling that this is the right way. Even though it's general and not specific, this is the right way to go, but it's unknown. So you move into the unknown with this known God, and that's what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are doing, and they're able to do it because they're taking these small steps. And each small step is focused on the next right thing. So that's what we want to do. We want to look at the life of Abraham, the life of Isaac, the life of Jacob, and see what small steps are they taking, or how are they just simply doing the next right thing. And how does that keep them moving forward and moving forward in his ways, even if his ways are an unknown future? So the thing I also discovered about leaks is that leaks can happen through pressure, and that's where a leak actually happens. There's some kind of pressure, and that pressure can be external or internal. And when you come to Isaac in his life, you see that there's some external pressure that's happening. What's going on surrounding him in his immediate context is creating pressure. So his focus, it's just fractured, or at least that's the temptation. So you come into Genesis chapter 26, and we're going to read a little bit about Isaac. Not too much, and then we'll move on to Jacob. But what I've noticed about Isaac is that it's a story that you and I can step into, because Isaac's story is centered around this event that's just overwhelming. And I don't know about you, but sometimes life can feel overwhelming. And I was chatting with a guy just earlier this week, and the phrase he dropped to me that just coalesces with this idea. He said, "David, you just don't understand what you're asking me to do in my life right now. It's just so overwhelming." And that's what external pressure does. It's overwhelming. So it puts pressure on us, and it's from the outside. So it's like, I can't do anything about this. I have no control. That's where the idea of the next right thing comes into play. So you open to Genesis chapter 26, and it's just a brief note. In that time, there was a famine in the land. There was a famine in the land. So there's no DoorDash, there's no Uber Eats, there's no Instacart, there's not even those scenarios where there's a rush to buy all the staples because snow's coming. But if you just prep for a day or two, the stores are going to restock their shelves and all that. No, there's a famine in the land. There's this external pressure that's creating this circumstance. I had this happen not too long ago. So we're at our house and we're just hanging out. Things are great, but it's, I think it was the year before last, when it's really cold, temperatures like the past month or so, super cold. And then we just hear this like pop. There's this pop. And then when everything goes quiet, you can just hear like a, and it's constant and it's aggressive and it's, it's just powerful. Like it wants out. It wants release. So we're like, what is that? Where is that coming from? Then all of a sudden the kitchen floor is just probably an inch of water, and it's just going everywhere. And luckily my dad was there. Me, Michelle, and my dad were downstairs, and we're like, what is happening? So in a moment of scramble, the only thing we knew to do was grab some towels out of the laundry room and create a barrier so that they didn't seep onto the other floor, because you got tile right there so it doesn't seep into the other floor and destroy that. So we do that. Then the next idea was goes, okay, now we need to shut the water off. So I run in there to the room and I shut the water off, and then we go into cleaning it up the best that we possibly can. So there was like this order to it, what's the next step? How do you deal with this? Well, block it off, and then shut it off, and then clean it up. But all of a sudden, this external pressure just created an external situation that we weren't prepped to deal with. There's famine in the land. And it's maybe not famine, maybe it's not a water leak, but you know what it is for you. And it feels like it's so overwhelming because you don't know what to do. That's why we take a look at the next right thing. So as this story moves on in chapter 26, Isaac is commanded to stay in this particular land with this particular setup. But since he has God's blessing upon him, he actually accrues some wealth. And he's able to reignite this endeavor where he's reopening some wells that his father Abraham had dug up, but they had been covered over due to the passing of time. So Isaac is reopening these wells, and things are going really well. So you read the story, and here's how the story goes. So Isaac dug in the valley. He's going to redig these wells. Well, the herdsmen of Gerar, well, they complained. This is ours. So you know what Isaac and his men do? They dig another well. Well, you keep reading the story, and the story tells us that the herdsmen of Gerar, well, they quarreled about this as well. So you know what Isaac and his guys do? They dig another well. One of my favorite quotes about doing the next right thing is simply this: do the right thing, and then do the next right thing. And the next right thing, do the next right thing. I love that quote. So sometimes you'll find this, and it's true in your life. You're doing something and it's right, and you think everything should fall into place, but no, there's still some tension. Or it's tricky, it's complicated. And the only thing to do is the next right thing, but it's hard because the next right thing is what you just did. But that's the right thing. And if it's the next right thing, well, that's what you're going to do. In other words, if you need to dig a well, you're going to dig a well. And if you need to dig another well, you're going to dig another well. And if you need to dig a third well, you're going to dig a third well. You're going to do the next right thing. And then do the next right thing. And then do the next right thing. Especially when there's external pressure. So you move on and you start reading about this guy Jacob. And this is where we get a really cool timeline. And I think this is practical. I'm going to go a little theological here in just a moment. And I hope you like that stuff. If you don't, just it's restroom time. There's probably still some refreshments back in the community room. Just take about a 5-minute break. That's all I need. But if you like this stuff, I think it'll be super enlightening for you. But we come to Jacob. And Jacob's character is really important. When we get to Joseph next week, you're going to see that there's this small statement that may imply that Jacob drops the ball with God's vision. But before we get there, some cool stuff happens in Jacob's life. And this is where we get to the idea that the pressure is not only external, the pressure can be internal. So it's not something going on out here. There's actually something going on in here that's causing vision to leak. So Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, and he's the son of Isaac. So we've got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this promise that was given to Abraham back in chapter 12 is extended and kept alive with Isaac. And it's extended and kept alive with Jacob. So Jacob is able to assume his role in perpetuating this promise. And some time goes on, and he has a couple of events with God, and they're very enlightening for Jacob. So he's going and he's traveling, and he actually finds this desert location where there's not much around at all. And he's tired, and it's nighttime, so he's just going to take a nap. And he finds this rock, and he pulls it over and uses it as a pillow. And while he's asleep, he has this dream. And this is where, if you've been around church for a while, you get the idea of Jacob's ladder. He has this dream where you see some stuff ascending and descending along this ladder. And then he wakes up and he realizes something. And this is what the text tells us. He realizes that God's there. And this must be some kind of significant or holy place. God is actually doing something here. And what Jacob will discover is that it's not God doing something there as much as it is in here. So God meets him with this dream, but the author, knowing that we need to know what's going on with Jacob, drops that line, and he was afraid. You see, that's what fear does to us. Fear confuses us, where you've got this moment of motivation or wisdom or insight, and then just a short time later, you're unsure because something's going on in here. So a few nights ago, actually, I had another leak. Didn't know where it was coming from. I was watching a late NBA game, and the Lakers, even though I do not like LeBron James, I like to watch him play and just criticize him. Anybody else feel me on that? You know, you really don't like someone, but you like to observe them so that you can critique or criticize them or maybe feel a little bit more better about yourself. Well, I'm getting too personal now, right? Okay, anyway, watching the Lakers play, it was a little too late, so I fell asleep on the couch. So I wake up, and I don't know how the brain works, how we hear and all of that stuff, but it was just a faint sound, almost like a gurgle. It was like a gurgle, but it was so faint. And I walk over and I'm like, oh, that's got to be the refrigerator, you know, the freezer and all that stuff and how it makes ice and all that jazz. It's just a little gurgle or something like that. So I go over to the fridge and I'm like, no, it's coming from over there. So I go over there, and over there is where the initial leak from 2 winters ago occurred. So I go over there and I'm like, please no. And I listen and I'm like, wait, it's not over here, it's over there. So I go back to the fridge, it's not over there, and I'm like, oh, it's gotta be in the dishwasher. So I go over to the dishwasher, we had a load going, it's not the dishwasher. And I'm like, where is this thing coming from? So I'm walking around, and then I kind of hear it in the hallway. So go to the hallway, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm not going up the stairs. It's late, I'm tired, the game's over. I'm just gonna go back to the couch and fall back asleep, or I'll never get to sleep. And I'm like, I'll just leave it. If it's a leak, it's a leak. If it does some damage, well, we'll call Progressive, tomorrow and get them to cover it or whatever. But I'm just going to leave it because I don't know where it's coming from, and I don't want to mess with this. You ever been there? I mean, there's something over here you got to deal with. There's something happening that needs you to fix it. There's a leak, and it's not going to stop unless you deal with it. But there's something going on in here. And it's that idea of being afraid. And when you read the word afraid in the Old Testament, not so much the New Testament specifically, but the Old Testament, it's like there's a spectrum, if you will. Where over here you've got dread and terror. And on the other end of the spectrum of afraid, you have awe and reverence. And I think that's a great description of how it is with us and God sometimes. You've got this dread and terror, but also this reverence and awe. And sometimes they meet, and sometimes it's more here, sometimes it's more here. Then when they get a little close, it is a little confusing about what's happening here. And then your spiritual disorientation, it's like, I'm just not going to deal with that. And that is the essence of being afraid. When you're fearful, you want to flee. So Jacob at this time, he's afraid. And it kind of makes sense. He's 77. If you look at his story, he's actually fleeing his circumstances. Some scholars would actually call him a fugitive in his day. And when you look at his home life and his relationships, it's a wreck, a family disaster. But the redemptive reach of God is still available for him. And that's why God meets him in this dream, because he's going to use Jacob to carry on and perpetuate this promise. So eventually I go up the stairs and I realize that it's in the tank of the toilet, and the one little gear in there just needs replaced, and it's an easy fix for the night because I just shut the water off. And then I'm going to go back and fix it, later, but I'm able to finally find it and go but there was something going on in me that just wanted to flee and not deal with that. And maybe that's where God's meeting you right now, because it seems like a really big deal. Or your involvement in dealing with this leak seems confusing, or it makes you afraid, or you're scared, or you're unsure. But if you actually go into that unknown with this known God and you do the next right thing, you'll see, you know what? This really wasn't that big of a deal. So the thing about Jacob, there's two things about this story of Jacob that I want you to get. This is really interesting. 2 times God tells Jacob that he's going to change his name. You can read about those in chapters 32 and 35. He tells Jacob that he's going to change his name. And it's neat to see that there's a gap between those times. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here's the theological point that I want you to get. This is really important for our faith and how we understand our faith. It's also important to help us understand why we don't observe Sabbath. Why we don't cease from work starting sundown Friday night until sundown Saturday. This is also an explanation of why most of us enjoy pork. This is also an example of why we don't always talk about the importance of circumcision. This is why we don't have too many holy days throughout the week or the months or the years. This is why some of those Old Testament commands that don't make sense in a 21st century world don't make sense to your context because they're not part of your spiritual context. This is where we get the idea that some of the laws given to ancient Israel were temporary, giving for a time while Israel was worshiping in pursuit of this promised land and worshiping at the temple. It's also an explanation of why you and I no longer offer animal sacrifices, and an explanation of why Jesus has become the sacrifice for you and I and our sins once and for all. So Jacob's name is actually changed to Israel. So Israel has 12 children, and we'll get into a little bit of that next week, has 12 children. So his 12 children, Jacob's 12 children, literally become the children of Israel. So over time, when you finish Genesis and go into Exodus, they have mass produced, and they are turning into an entire nation, if you will. So that's important. Well, this is why those New Testament authors come and they start regurgitating some of this language that seems disconnected from us. In the 21st century American world, we want church to be extremely practical. And sometimes we substitute that practical for the theological. So we want both. But if we just look at the practical, we'll miss some of the theological concepts. That's why when you do some of your reading, if you're reading through the Bible in a year, or you're doing a devotional, and you read some stuff from like Galatians or Romans, it's why some of the chapters or some of the verses, they don't really connect with you. They don't make sense because we don't have that full context. Well, this is why Paul would write Romans. Or this is why Paul would write Galatians, and in particular, Romans chapters 3 and 4, or Galatians chapter 3. These help us with this idea and what is going on with this promise. This promise was given to Abraham, that he was going to use Abraham to eventually bless the entire world. Well, he did by giving him a son, Isaac. And Isaac was going to perpetuate this promise, and God is using Isaac to bring about Jacob. And he changes Jacob's name to Israel. And Israel has 12 sons and then just spread out. And then Paul would write in Romans 4. So it's not through the law that Abraham and his offspring were given the promise. The law wasn't even given yet. So it wasn't through the law that Abraham and his offspring were given the promise. It was a righteousness that comes through faith. Or Paul would write in Galatians, every one of us that have faith, well, we're children of God through our faith in Christ. And if we belong to Christ, then we're not only his children, but we're heirs according to what? This promise. This promise has trickled down to us. So it's no longer, we're more like Abraham than we are ancient Israel. It's no longer the law that sets us apart. It's our faith. Now, if you're questioning that, we can talk about it some other time, and we'll talk about it after service. Allow it to suffice now for me to say, so your faith is not just a substitute for the law. Your faith doesn't take you away from the law. Your faith frames up what God is doing in Christ that leads you and I to the righteous life we should live through our faith in him. So we're not disregarding God's ways. We're simply applying God's ways in the new covenant era. Good? It's a lot, but I want you to get that because that's what's happening. And that's why Romans and Galatians, that's why those books are written. Second thing I want you to get, and this is crazy cool, I think. We all have those moments where you're reminded that something is happening in your life. And you can't explain it if you disregard the concept of God, like God's involved in your life. So I'm thinking about God changing Jacob's name to Israel. And this happens twice. But it happens twice, so that means there's a gap. There's a gap. So let me ask you as your pastor, if there was a time in your life, maybe it was here on a Sunday morning, maybe it was some time ago, or maybe it was somewhat recent, where you knew that God was doing something in your world. There was a stirring, there was a thought, there was an answered prayer. You knew the hand of God was moving in your life in some capacity. And you had that just moment of meaning and inspiration. Well, now here you are this morning. Here we are. And some time has elapsed. Have you followed through with that? Has that actually made a difference in your life? Did that moment that happened last week, last month, or last year, did it really move you closer to Him and His ways? Have you lost sight of that? I remember being in Starbucks, right? Being in Starbucks about 2 years ago. And I was listening to this TobyMac song. And if you don't know TobyMac, he's just a great Christian artist. He's phenomenal, very, very creative in his songs, but so true to the message of God. Just honors God with his lyrics. I love his stuff. But I'm listening to this TobyMac song, and the name of it is Made to Love. And when it gets down to like past the chorus, there's just this way he sings these two lines, and he repeats them. He repeats them 3 times, and it's got this really cool sound to it. And I'm just listening to that. And I remember very specifically being in Starbucks 2 years ago, and I had torn up some paper, and I was going to the trash can, and I'd just thrown it in. And those 2 lines, he's like halfway through just singing those. Gosh, I was feeling it. It was really connecting with me. It made so much sense in the moment. 4 days ago, not making this up, 4 days ago, I'm in the same Starbucks. I just torn up some paper, had some AirPods in, walked over to the trash can, and it hit me. I'm listening to that song, and as I'm walking back to my table, he's at the same part, same Starbucks, same song, same lyrics, and it hit me. Is that really true for your life, David? Like since 2 years ago, has that really made a difference? Here are the lyrics. Oh, I wish I could sing. I would sing them for you. He says, anything I would give up for you. Everything, I'd give it all away. Anything, I would give up for you. Everything, I'd give it all away. Anything, I would give up for you. Everything, I'd give it. I'd give it all away. There was something going on in me 2 years ago, and I felt it. Like I just woke up from a dream like Jacob. And over 2 years, I started asking myself 4 days ago, did fear seep in? Did that vision leak a little? What have I done about that? And that's the question I have for you as your pastor. You know, when God really gets inside of what's going on inside of you and gives some calm or peace or clarity and some time elapses, does that moment actually mean anything? Or does what's going inside of you take you away from that? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way to today. Now, if I have 3 more minutes of your time, then we'll close. You're struggling with the next step, the small step. What could it be? Or for you, what is the next right thing? Well, I've been human long enough and a pastor long enough to know that this isn't just a shot in the dark, but I think we've got some substance here in the text. So when God comes to Isaac and there's a famine in the land, here are the words that are written in chapter 26. Just listen to this, not on the screen. I just want you to hear the word of God. God says to Isaac, stay in this land for a while, and I'll be with you, and I'll bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. And I know this is a lot, but I promise it's got a great punch to it. I'll make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them these lands, and through your offspring all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because your father Abraham obeyed me, kept my requirements, my commands, my decrees, and my laws. Stay in this land, God says to Isaac. And this little section ends with these words. So Isaac stayed. Maybe the next right thing for you is to stay. That's the next right thing. You need to stay in your marriage. Maybe some of you need to stay at Madison Hills. Some of you need to stay at the place where you're making money, your job. Some of you, and if this is you, please see me. Some of you need to stay alive. You flip over a couple of chapters with Jacob. You're thinking about, what's the next right thing for me? That small step I could take into this unknown future. Well, Jacob wakes up, and even though he's afraid, he says this to himself. Again, not on the screen, just listen to this. He says, how awesome is this place? Did you know the word awesome was actually in the Bible? How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This has to be the gate of heaven, he says. Again, listen to this. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head, set it up as a pillar, poured oil on top of it. And I know that's a little, disconnected from what we would do. But he called that place Bethel. And then Jacob made a vow saying, if God, and I want you to hear this, if God will be with me, like he said in this dream, and he'll watch over me on this journey, and he'll give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. That's not bargaining, guys. That's not Jacob saying, if God will do this, then I'll follow him. No, God had promised to do those things. So Jacob is saying, if this is what God is offering me, he's my God. Why would I go anywhere else? And in doing that, Jacob is actually keeping this vision given to his grandfather Abraham. He's keeping that vision alive. And this is such an important moment because vision leaks. You're not here by accident. You're here because of this redemptive vision of God. And vision leaks. So maybe your next right thing to do is to make sure that he's your God. And in doing so, keep this vision alive. Now, if you don't know how to do that, next week, what we were going to do last Sunday, but snow got in the way. Next week, we're going to have that mission meeting. And it's not mission like going to Guatemala. It's not mission like go out into the local community. It's missional. So if you're on mission, it says, this is what my life looks like when I'm having conversations with people. This is what my life looks like when I'm trying to introduce them to the ways of Christ. This is what my life looks like when I'm coming alongside of someone and doing life with them in effort to disciple them. This is what my life looks like when I'm on mission and I understand, that it's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and it trickles all the way down to me. Because if I belong to Christ, I'm heirs according to this promise. And I'm to perpetuate this redemptive plan of God. That'll be next Sunday, right after service. We'll just meet in the community room. Again, we'll feed you, and then we'll just talk about what that looks like and next steps for you. And I'd love for you to be there. You think you can make it to that? Who thinks they can make it to that? All right, fantastic. That's a good working group. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to end, but listen, if you need to talk to me about anything like next steps and what that looks like for you, or the step that you're going to take is small, but you know it's the next right thing, you're just feeling some external or internal pressure, I'm available. I'll just be in the back. Please see me, and we can help you move into the unknown with a known God. Sound good? Father, thank you so much for the way you love us. And not only loving us, but inviting us into you and what you would call your family, and showing us the way forward. And sometimes we just don't know what that is. So all you require of us is to do the next right thing. We thank you for that, Father. And if we focus on doing the next right thing, we know that we can do the next right thing. And then the next right thing, it will often reveal itself to us. And I pray that that's what's happened in this moment of being together this morning. All for you, Father. In the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.